Hello and welcome to Lesson 1, Introduction to Data Sufficiency, courtesy of the GMATtutor.com. The ideas that I'll be discussing throughout this video series are concepts that I've developed over the past 3 years as a GMAT instructor. The agenda for Lesson 1 will be, first of all, to introduce the data sufficiency question type. That'll be followed by a discussion of some of the fundamentals that you need to know in order to answer these questions. That includes a standardized method for doing data sufficiency, as well as a discussion of the two question types, which are yes/no questions and value questions. This video is probably best for students that are brand new to the data sufficiency question type. In Lesson 2, I'll be going into some more advanced tips and problem-solving techniques for data sufficiency. A quick word about the format of this video series. I'll be introducing concepts and demonstrating them through the use of example problems. My recommendation is that you pause the video on slides that have example problems and attempt to solve them. Now, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong way to do a problem, but I am trying to do examples that have key takeaway concepts which can be applied to other problems. So I do recommend you pay careful attention to the explanations. While some of the earlier examples may be easy, they will become difficult later on in this video series. Now, to officially introduce the data sufficiency question type. It's a question followed by two statements, and you have to evaluate the statements for whether they're sufficient to answer the question. Every data sufficiency question has the same 5 answer choices. Because of that, this question type is most amenable to applying a standard method. Now, new students who are just beginning their GMAT prep often struggle with data sufficiency, but with the right kind of preparation, dramatic improvements are possible on this question type. Now, as I mentioned, every data sufficiency question has the same 5 answer choices. These can be found on page 268 of the official guide 12th edition. Answer choice A is that statement 1 alone is sufficient, but statement 2 alone is not sufficient to answer the question asked. Answer choice B is that statement 2 alone is sufficient, but statement 1 alone is not sufficient to answer the question asked. Answer choice C is that both statements together are sufficient to answer the question. Answer choice D is that each statement alone is sufficient to answer the question. And answer choice E is that statements 1 and 2 are not sufficient to answer the question. Now, many people struggle with these answer choices initially, but after you've done enough example problems, you will memorize the answer choices and what each of them represents. When you're just getting started, a useful way to remember them is through a little memory trick called 1, 2, 10. And what this means is that answer choice A is 1 alone is sufficient. Answer choice B is 2 alone is sufficient. Answer choice C is both statements together. Answer choice D is each statement alone. And answer choice E is neither. So 1 to 10 can be useful when you're first getting started in order to memorize what each of the answer choices represents. Now, to begin introducing the standard method for answering data sufficiency questions, you're going to begin by asking, is statement 1 sufficient alone? And if it is, then the answer to the question will be A or D. If it's not, then the answer to the question will be B, C, or E. As we'll see on the next slide, the method is a little more complex than this, but you're always going to begin by asking, is statement 1 sufficient alone? And you'll be able to narrow down the answer choices to either A, D, or B, C, E. Now, the full method is a little more complicated. As I said, you'll begin by asking, is statement 1 sufficient alone? In the case where the answer to that question is yes, you're down to answer choices A or D. You next have to ask, is statement 2 sufficient alone? And if the answer to that question is yes, then the correct answer choice is D, which means that each statement alone is sufficient. If statement 2 was insufficient alone, then the correct answer is going to be A. And A means that statement 1 alone was sufficient, but statement 2 alone was insufficient. And you can see how we arrive at that by using this flowchart. Going back to the beginning, if we asked, is statement 1 sufficient alone, and the answer was no, then the answer to the question will be B, C, or E. You're next evaluating statement 2 and asking, is statement 2 sufficient alone? And if the answer is yes, then the correct answer choice will be B. If the answer is no, then you have to evaluate the statements together. Remember, you're now at a point where you've evaluated statement 1 and you've answered no, it's insufficient. You've evaluated statement 2 and you've answered no, it's insufficient. So now at this point you're evaluating statements 1 and 2 together. If they are sufficient together, the correct answer choice is C. If they are insufficient together, the correct answer choice is E. Continuing on, I'd like to go over the method just with text. You're going to begin by reading the question stem in the data sufficiency problem. You're going to note any information that's provided to you. It may tell you that X is a positive number or X is an integer. These can be critical when you're answering the question. And you want to ask yourself, what information do you need in order to answer this question? You'll then evaluate statement 1 independently. And as I emphasized, if it's sufficient, the answer is A or D. If it's insufficient, the answer is B, C, or E. You'll go on to evaluate statement 2 independently. And you may be able to answer the question at this point. If statement 2 is also insufficient in addition to statement 1, then you'll have to go on and evaluate the statements together. However, I want to emphasize that you evaluate the statements together only if necessary. That'll be the case when statement 1 is insufficient and statement 2 is also insufficient. In that case, you're down to answer choices C or E, and you have to evaluate the statements together.